In China, networking isn't about collecting business cards, it is about whose elemental gear you mesh with. The word is Baibi. Literally, it means to compare. Most foreigners think this means price shopping between three factories. Big mistake. The silent code is resonance 共鸣. Look at the 120-degree Trinity. This isn't superstition, it is the algorithm of union. A 180-degree opposition means energy interference. If your elements clash, your communication will be constant friction. Stop playing the lottery with your partners. Let us decode the DNA of your next 10 million M alliance.
Usually when we talk about a catastrophic business failure, we kind of expect the autopsy report to be pretty straightforward.
Right, like it's a plane crash investigation or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you look at the black box, you check the mechanical logs, you sift through all the wreckage, and eventually you point to a very specific failed widget.
A blown gasket.
Right, a blown gasket, a frozen sensor, and you say, there it is, that's why it went down.
We really crave that binary explanation, I think. We want a clear, identifiable point of structural failure that we can point to.
We want to say, aha, human error, or aha, material fatigue.
Exactly. We want the broken supply chain, the missed delivery dates, or, the sudden spike in raw material costs.
Because it's clean, it's quantifiable, and honestly, it's comforting in a way.
Oh, totally. Because if a business failure is visible, if it can be neatly categorized in a post-mortem spreadsheet, that means we can build a new protocol to avoid it next time.
It gives us a sense of control over what is fundamentally a chaotic world.
It really does.
But then you step into the world of international partnerships. Specifically for this deep dive, we're talking about deep, cross-border, high-stakes supply chains.
And suddenly that comforting spreadsheet is completely, laughably useless.
Completely useless. We're looking at a landscape of failure that is, well, it's invisible. I want you, the listener at home, I want you to picture this for a second.
Okay, set the scene.
You have a massive international joint venture. We're talking a $500 million manufacturing deal.
Huge stakes.
Massive. The profit margins are incredibly fat. The delivery logistics have been flawlessly mapped out by, the best consultants money can buy.
Right.
The quality control checks are all passing with flying colors. On paper, it is the perfect corporate marriage.
A textbook success story just waiting to happen.
And yet it collapses entirely.
Burns to the ground.
It doesn't just stumble, it burns to the absolute ground. But here is the mystery. It doesn't collapse over money. Both sides were getting rich.
Right, and it doesn't collapse over shipping delays because the boats were on time.
Exactly. It collapses because of an invisible force that modern data-driven metrics completely fail to measure. A phenomenon our source material today calls psychological friction.
Yeah, and that right there is the absolute definition of a blind spot for modern management.
Totally.
I mean, you can have the best data scientists in the world analyzing your deal, and they will miss this completely because they're looking at the wrong layer of reality.
It's the silent killer of international commerce.
It really is.
And decoding that silent killer is exactly what we were doing today. For this deep dive, we have a single, incredibly dense, fascinating source text on the docket.
Well, it's a good one.
It is. It's called Hexagram 8 by the Physics of Social Alignment. Now, what this text does is, it's nothing short of mind-bending.
Yeah, it really takes you for a ride.
It takes ancient Chinese philosophies, specifically concepts from a text known as the I-Ching, and it translates them into a highly pragmatic, modern business framework.
A framework we can call Guangxi physics.
Right. And our mission here is crucial for anyone who works with other human beings. We are going to decode the hidden architecture of business relationships.
We want to figure out why some partnerships, whether that's a massive joint venture in manufacturing halfway across the world, or just, a collaboration between you and the marketing department in your own office.
Oh, yeah, it applies everywhere.
Right. Why some of those feel like a constant grinding battle, while others achieve this state of what the text calls silent efficiency.
Now, to get there, we have to establish the core clash that frames this entire deep dive.
The two competing worldviews.
Exactly. We are looking at two completely different ways of understanding how human beings and the businesses they build actually operate. On one side, we have what we'll call the KPI auditor perspective.
Right. And just to define our terms clearly right out of the gate, When we say KPI, we mean key performance indicators.
There's numbers.
The quantifiable metrics a company uses to gauge performance, revenue growth, defect rates, customer acquisition cost, the numbers on the dashboard.
So the KPI auditor perspective is this heavily modernized, deeply Western approach to business.
Hyper-focused on data.
Yes, hyper-focused on those dashboard numbers, on forcing partnerships to work through ironclad contracts, and relying on relentless, endless certifications.
It firmly believes that if the metrics align, the partnership simply must succeed.
It's basically an engineering mindset applied to human relationships.
And on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, we have what we're going to call the factory owner perspective.
Which is very different.
Wildly different. This represents an Eastern, more traditional approach that argues something else entirely. It argues that elemental resonance, the natural underlying structural alignment between people, is a vastly superior predictor of long-term stability than any spreadsheet could ever be.
It looks at the fundamental physics of the people involved, not just their resumes.
Exactly.
Now, I know what you're thinking at home. You listening right now are probably raising an eyebrow.
I would be.
Right, because when we say ancient Chinese philosophy and elemental resonance, a very specific alarm bell goes off for a modern professional.
Oh, sure. You're thinking, is this corporate astrology?
Yeah. Are they seriously going to tell me to check my vendor's Zodiac sign before signing a contract?
It is the most common and, frankly, the most understandable Western reaction.
Yeah.
We are so trained to separate the quantitative from the qualitative.
Oh, I'm right there with them. I mean, when I first read the brief for this deep dive, my immediate thought was, if I go to my HR department and say, we need to reject a candidate because their energy field doesn't resonate with mine,
You're getting fired.
I'm going to get fired. Or at least mandated to take some kind of seminar. It sounds like a massive HR liability.
And if you apply it literally as a mystical fortune-telling device, it is a liability. But that is fundamentally misreading what the source text is actually doing.
So clarify that for us.
To understand Guangxi physics, we have to define what Guangxi actually is. It's often lazily translated in Western business books as networking or connections.
Like exchanging business cards.
Right, which completely neuters the concept. Guangxi is the deep, complex, highly structured system of social capital, obligations, and relationship networks that facilitates business in China.
It is the invisible infrastructure of the economy.
Precisely. It's not just who you know at the golf course. It's a web of mutual reliance.
Okay, so how does the I Ching tie into this?
Well, what this text does is take the I Ching, which is the Book of Changes, a 3,000-year-old text originally used for divination by Zhou dynasty kings, and it strips away the mysticism.
It reveals a psychological taxonomy.
Exactly. The I Ching is essentially a map of how different states of energy and human behavior interact. When the factory owner perspective talks about elements, they aren't talking about literal fire or literal water.
Right, nobody is setting anything on fire.
They are talking about deeply ingrained behavioral archetypes and structural realities of how an organization operates.
Okay, so we're talking about behavioral data just categorized in a language we aren't used to in the West.
Exactly. The text argues that the ancients didn't have spreadsheets, right? So they mapped human behavior using the natural world as their vocabulary.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the warning the text gives us is that the KPI auditor's ultimate dream, the idea that you can just force behavioral alignment through legal documents, is mathematically flawed from the start.
All right, let's unpack this mechanism. Let's look at the actual source material. The text centers around Hexagram 8 from the I Ching. Now, for the uninitiated, what exactly is a hexagram?
Visually, a hexagram is a stack of 6 horizontal lines.
Okay.
Some lines are solid, representing yang or active energy, and some are broken in the middle, representing yin or receptive energy.
So it's a binary code, almost.
Very much so. There are 64 possible combinations of these lines, and each hexagram represents a specific situation, a specific dynamic of forces.
And we are looking at hexagram 8, which is known as B. That's spelled B-I-I, pronounced like the insect, B.
Right?
And B translates roughly to the art of grouping, or union. It's the concept of holding together.
Structurally, hexagram 8 is made of the trigram for water sitting on top of the trigram for earth. Water on the earth.
So the image is of water pooling together naturally.
Exactly, finding the lowest point, soaking into the soil. It represents a union that is organic, seamless, and totally unforced.
Which brings us to the central thesis of our text, which acts as a massive warning label for modern executives.
A huge warning label.
In the Chinese supply chain ecosystem, a forced partnership, one that is held together merely by the gravitational pull of contracts, non-disclosure agreements, and strict KPI demands, is basically a ticking time bomb.
To understand why it's a ticking time bomb, we have to introduce the alternative the text presents. This is the concept of the 60-year gear.
Or the Lushi-Jiazi.
Right, this is the true foundation for deep structural alignment in Guanxi physics.
Okay, 60-year gear, again, sounds a bit mystical. What is the actual math happening here? How did they arrive at a 60-year cycle?
It's actually grounded in ancient astronomy.
Let's break it down.
First, you have the 10 heavenly stems, which are tied to the wuxing, the 5 elements. That's wood, fire, earth, metal, and water.
And each has a yin and yang polarity.
Exactly. So 5 times 2 is 10. Then you have the 12 earthly branches, which are popularly known as the 12 animals of the Zodiac, like the rat, the dragon, the monkey.
Right, the ones you see on the placemats at a restaurant.
Yeah, exactly. But originally, these 12 branches were based on the roughly 12-year orbital cycle of Jupiter.
Oh, wow, fascinating. So it's literally based on observing celestial mechanics.
Yes. So imagine a gear with 10 teeth turning against a gear with 12 teeth. If you run the math, it takes exactly 60 turns for the exact same combination of stem and branch to meet again.
Hence the 60-year gear?
That is the 60-year gear. It is a cyclical system that categorizes the underlying energetic signatures, the structural behaviors of different times, people, and corporate entities.
And this is where our two worldviews violently collide.
They crash right into each other.
Because the KPI auditor perspective assumes that businesses, and by extension the humans running them, are basically modular. It's a plug-and-play mentality.
Yeah, it's like saying we have a buyer API and a supplier API. We just write a contract to connect the endpoints, and boom, data flows.
The partnership works.
That is the perfect way to describe it. The KPI auditor views human beings as infinitely malleable components. If a vendor isn't behaving the way you want, what do?
You don't question the fundamental relationship.
No, you just apply more pressure. You send another email, you enforce another penalty clause, you demand another weekly status meeting, you try to force them into the shape of your spreadsheet.
It's the old beatings will continue until morale improves strategy.
Exactly. But the factory owner perspective, drawing on Hexagram 8, understands that businesses and individuals operate much more like massive, intricate, interlocking gears in a giant mechanical watch.
I love this analogy. If you've ever looked inside a mechanical watch, you know you cannot just jam any two gears together.
It's impossible.
If the teeth don't fit naturally, if the pitch and the angle are wrong, forcing them to turn together isn't going to make the watch keep time. It's just going to violently strip the gears.
The whole mechanism breaks down.
You can force it for a minute, maybe a day, but the friction will eventually destroy the very metal they're made of.
That is precisely why the forced partnership is a ticking time bomb. Because when the KPI auditor tries to force alignment through contracts, they're essentially ignoring the shape of the gear teeth.
They're saying the teeth don't matter.
Right. They are saying, I don't care if your internal structure naturally resonates with mine. I have a legally binding document that says you must turn at this exact speed.
And the factory owner knows that the structural reality, the physics of the situation, will always win out over a piece of paper.
Every single time. The friction is inevitable, and the cost of that friction will eventually eat the entire profit margin.
Let's use a modern tech analogy here to really make the mechanism clear for the listener. Think about trying to merge two completely different software operating systems.
Okay, good example.
Say you have a massive legacy corporation running entirely on a highly customized, heavily guarded Windows architecture, and they decide to merge with a hip, agile new startup that runs entirely on the latest macOS ecosystem.
A classic M&A scenario.
Right. Now, the executives, our KPI auditors, sit in a boardroom, shake hands, sign the papers, and say, great, we are one company now. Everyone share your files.
Which is a complete disaster.
Complete disaster, because you can write all the temporary bridging code you want. You can force everyone to use the same web-based apps. You can write corporate policies mandating integration.
But the background processing.
Yes, the background process is the fundamental architecture of how those systems handle memory, how they route data, how they manage security permissions. They are inherently different.
They will constantly crash against each other.
The bridge will always be fragile because the baseline reality of the code is incompatible.
That translates perfectly to Guanxi physics.
Okay.
The contracts, the NDAs, the weekly status meetings, those are the temporary bridging code.
And the 60-year gear.
The 60-year gear, the elemental alignments of the people involved, those are the background processes. And what the factory owner perspective argues is that you cannot write enough contracts to override a fundamental incompatibility in the background processes.
The system will eventually crash.
It has to. When the text talks about Guanxi physics, it's using the word physics intentionally. It implies laws of nature, predictable reactions, forces that operate regardless of whether you personally believe in them or not.
If you ignore gravity, you fall.
If you ignore the natural alignment of your business partners, your partnership fails.
Which is why we need to look at what happens when you don't ignore gravity. We've established the danger of stripping the gears, but what does it look like when the background processes actually match?
It's a completely different experience.
We move from the anxiety and exhaustion of the forced partnership to the beauty of mathematical alignment. We move into the realm of silent efficiency.
And this requires us to look at the actual geometry of the 60-year gear. How do we know which teeth fit together?
This brings us to one of the most compelling concepts in the source text, the 120-degree rule, or Sanhe.
The geometry of trust.
I want to spend some time here because this is where the math really clicked for me. How does this rule work?
It is literal geometry. The 120-degree rule describes a specific relationship within the 12 earthly branches, the animals of the Zodiac.
Okay.
Imagine those 12 signs arranged in a circle, like the numbers on a clock face or a compass. Since a circle is 360 degrees, each of the 12 signs occupies a 30-degree slice.
Okay, I'm visualizing a clock.
Now, if you take any sign on that clock and you move exactly 4 spaces away, which is 4 times 30, or 120 degrees, you hit a highly compatible sign.
Interesting.
If you go another 120 degrees, you hit a third highly compatible sign. Connect those 3 points, and you have drawn a perfect equilateral triangle inside the circle.
And in Guanxi physics, this is known as a generative triangle.
Exactly.
So they aren't just sitting next to each other on the wheel.
Right.
They are spaced perfectly to balance and actively feed into one another.
The source text gives us a prime example of this. The triangle formed by the rat, the dragon, and the monkey.
Okay, let's look at their elements.
To understand the physics here, we have to look at their elemental associations. The rat is pure water.
Got it.
The dragon is earth. But specifically in this system, it functions as a reservoir or a dam for water. And the monkey is metal.
Wait, how do metal, water, and earth feed into each other? I understand water and earth, like a river and a dam, but where does metal come in?
Right, it seems unintuitive. But in the cyclical generation of Waxing, the 5 elements, metal generates water.
How so?
Think of it like condensation. If you take a cold metal sword and leave it out in the night air, water droplets form on the blade. Metal draws water out of the ether.
Oh, wow.
So metal condensates water, and water flows into and is contained by the earth reservoir.
So it's a perfectly self-sustaining loop. The metal generates the rat, which is water. And that water is captured, utilized, and directed by the dragon, the earth. There's no blockage, there's no friction. The energy just flows endlessly around that 120-degree triangle.
Precisely. The internal gears mesh perfectly. The teeth of the gears are angled exactly right to turn each other. And the text explains how this geometric elemental reality manifests in the actual physical world of business.
It doesn't manifest as mystical glowing auras.
No, it manifests as intuitive trust.
And this leads to my absolute favorite image from the text. This is where the theory hits the pavement. The 5-minute tea table decision.
The absolute hallmark of silent efficiency.
Picture this. You have a factory owner in Shenzhen and a massive international buyer. They sit down at a beautifully carved wooden tea table.
Very traditional setup.
Right. The factory owner is pouring the tea, maybe a really expensive aged pure, performing the whole gong fu tea ritual. They're chatting about the weather, their families, maybe a little bit about the macro state of the industry.
Just casual conversation.
And within 5 minutes, between sips of tea, a multi-million-dollar production contract is verbally agreed upon. A handshake, a nod, and the deal is done.
And if you put a Western KPI auditor in the corner of that room to observe this, it looks like absolute madness.
It looks reckless.
It looks like gross corporate negligence.
The KPI auditor is standing there having a panic attack. They are clutching a heavy binder full of compliance checklists. They are screaming internally, "Wait, stop! We haven't run the background checks. We haven't audited their Tier 2 suppliers.
We haven't done a 6-month pilot program.
Exactly. We haven't debated the penalty clauses for a delay of 3.5 days. The auditor needs months of vetting, legal wrangling, and endless soul-crushing Zoom calls to achieve a fraction of the trust that was just established over a tiny porcelain cup of tea.
But that's because the KPI auditor doesn't see the 120-degree generative triangle at play.
They're blind to it.
Completely. They don't see that the factory owner and the buyer are sitting in a state of structural resonance. They don't need endless KPI meetings because the trust is structural, not learned. It's pre-existing in their geometry.
It's like they speak the exact same energetic language. They don't have to constantly translate their motives to each other. I want you, the listener, to just imagine the sheer relief of working in a partnership like that.
It's rare, but it's incredible.
We've all had that one coworker or business partner where it just works. Imagine working in a generative triangle where you don't have to constantly explain yourself.
Where you don't have to write a 3-page, carefully worded email to justify a tiny pivot in strategy.
Because your partner just intuitively gets it. They feel the flow of the decision just as naturally as you do.
What's fascinating here is that this kind of intuition, the gut feeling that tells you this person is good for the deal, is almost always dismissed in Western business as irrational.
Oh, totally. We are taught to suppress it.
Don't trust your gut, trust the data. But Guangxi physics frames it entirely differently. This intuition isn't magic. It isn't just a lucky guess.
It's pattern recognition.
Exactly. It is the natural physical byproduct of structural resonance. Your subconscious, your deeply evolved pattern recognition software, is picking up on the fact that your internal gears and their internal gears are perfectly aligned.
You are sensing the 120-degree flow.
The physics of social alignment are working effortlessly, generating forward momentum without heat or friction.
It's silent efficiency. The machine is running so smoothly you can't even hear the engine.
It's a beautiful thing.
But as beautiful as the generative triangle is, the source text doesn't let us stay at the tea table for long.
No, it doesn't.
Because if there is a geometry of trust, there must be a geometry of destruction. What happens when that beautiful 120-degree flow is replaced by its polar opposite?
It gets ugly fast.
We have to move from the peace of the tea table to the absolute carnage of the corporate battlefield.
We move into the 180-degree clash, or what the text refers to as Luchong.
And this brings us to the concept of invisible costs. If the 120-degree rule is about things happening seamlessly, the 180-degree clash is about everything feeling like a monumental, exhausting struggle.
It's the friction that eats your margins alive.
But never, ever shows up on an invoice.
Let's look at the geometry again.
Yeah.
If 120 degrees is harmony, what happens at 180 degrees?
You're on opposite sides of the wheel.
You are looking at the sign directly across the circle from you. You are polar opposites. The source text gives us a very specific, deeply illustrative example of this, the water-fire conflict.
Specifically manifesting as the rat versus the horse.
Right.
Okay, let's break this down behaviorally, because this is where the KPI auditor perspective completely falls apart in the real world. So we have a buyer who operates structurally as a water sign, the rat.
Okay.
And we have a supplier who operates as a fire sign, the horse. They're exactly 180 degrees apart. What do their diverging motivations actually look like on, say, a random Tuesday afternoon?
To understand their behavior, we have to look at the intrinsic nature of the elements they represent. Think about water in nature. What does it do?
Water flows downward.
It flows downward. It seeks the lowest point. It is deeply thorough. It seeps into every crack, every crevice, every tiny gap.
So in a business context,
In a business context, a water buyer is obsessed with details, with smooth, uninterrupted flow, and with extreme caution. They want to map every potential risk.
they want the logistics pipeline to be as fluid and predictable as a calm river.
Exactly. They will ask 100 what-if questions before they take a single step forward because they need to know exactly where the water's going to pool.
Right. They are the ultimate due diligence machine. They live in spreadsheets and risk assessment matrices.
Now compare that to the fire supplier.
Very different energy.
Night and day. Fire doesn't flow down. It burns upward. It expands. It is aggressive, bright, volatile, and fast. It consumes fuel to create heat and light.
So a fire supplier doesn't care about the tiny cracks in the floorboards.
It's not at all. They care about upward mobility, aggressive expansion, rapid prototyping, and getting to market yesterday.
They want speed.
They view hesitation as a missed opportunity, as oxygen being cut off from the flame.
And here's the most crucial distinction the source text makes. If listeners take only one thing away from this deep dive, it should be this. This is not a personality clash.
Yes. We need to scream that from the rooftops.
It is so easy and so incredibly common in Western corporate culture to reduce this dynamic to a personality flaw.
Right. The KPI auditor looks at this friction and says, oh, Bob in purchasing is a micromanager and Steve at the factory is a cowboy.
The auditor labels the fire supplier as reckless, unprofessional, or lacking attention to detail.
Meanwhile, the factory owner, or the fire supplier in this case, looks at the water buyer and labels them as paralyzed by analysis, bureaucratic, or obsessed with trivia.
They start making moral judgments about each other's work ethic. They start assuming the other person is either stupid or actively trying to sabotage the project.
Exactly. But neither is objectively wrong. Neither is acting out of malice or incompetence. Their energetic geometries simply oppose each other at a direct 180-degree angle.
It is a structural interference of the wuxing energy field.
When water and fire meet, you don't get a smooth turning of gears. You get steam, you get pressure, you get a violent, volatile reaction.
I want to push back slightly here, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because couldn't you argue that they both want the same thing? They both want a successful deal. They just have different strategies. Shouldn't clear communication fix that?
That is exactly what the KPI auditor argues. Just get them in a room and communicate.
Right.
But Guangxi physics says that communication is the actual source of the friction because they're speaking fundamentally incompatible languages.
Because their motivations are misaligned.
Think about the tragedy of this clash. Both the water buyer and the fire supplier are acting in entirely good faith.
The water buyer is asking for the 50-page compliance document because they genuinely believe that is the only way to protect the business.
They're trying to save the deal. And the fire supplier is ignoring the compliance document and rushing the prototype into production because they genuinely believe that hitting the market window is the only way to ensure the product is profitable.
They're also trying to save the deal.
But their natural instincts act as an immense grinding friction against each other. Every action one takes to secure the partnership feels like a direct assault to the other.
Let's make this tangible. Think about the sheer amount of time wasted in this dynamic. The water buyer sends a dense, highly detailed email requesting 10 points of clarification on a shipping manifest.
Very normal water behavior.
Right. The fire supplier reads it, feels their momentum being violently stifled, and replies with a one-sentence message on Slack. It's handled, shipping tomorrow.
Which is the worst possible thing they could say to a water sign.
It's nuclear. The water buyer panics. They assume the supplier is hiding something, so they escalate to a massive Zoom meeting requiring legal counsel.
And the fire supplier is forced to sit in this Zoom meeting, fuming, physically agitated.
Calculating the thousands of dollars in production time they are losing by sitting in this bureaucratic nightmare.
The invisible costs here are staggering.
It's the cost of lost sleep. It's the cost of employee turnover because your team is burned out from constantly fighting with the vendor.
It's the cost of missed market opportunities because you were too busy arguing over spreadsheet formatting to actually innovate.
And none of that shows up on a KPI dashboard.
Never. And if we connect this to the listener's own life, this explains so much daily professional frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
If you are experiencing endless grinding friction with a partner, whether that's a co-founder, a key vendor, or even just a colleague you are supposed to collaborate with on a project, you have to step back.
It might not be malice.
It might not be incompetence. You might just be caught in a structural 180-degree clash. You are fire, they're water.
And here is the hard truth of Guangxi physics. No amount of auditing, no amount of communication training, no amount of corporate offsites with trust falls and whiteboards will fix a structural wuxing interference.
You cannot train fire to act like water.
You cannot audit your way out of physics.
You absolutely cannot.
Okay, we need to make these abstract geometries entirely concrete. We've talked about the theory, the 120-degree harmony, the 180-degree clash of water and fire. Let's look at a deeply specific, real-world disaster from the text.
A case study.
Right, where a KPI auditor completely missed the Guangxi physics at play, and it resulted in a spectacular, expensive implosion.
This is a classic example from the source text of what happens when auditing fundamentally transforms into attacking. We are talking about the metal versus wood case study.
Let's set the scene with some granular detail. We have a major, prestigious German automotive buyer. They are looking to source highly specialized precision plastic parts for a new vehicle line.
Okay.
And they partner with a highly capable, incredibly fast-growing plastic molder in southern China, right in the heart of Shenzhen's manufacturing ecosystem.
Now, on the surface, On the KPI dashboard, this is a match made in heaven.
Exactly. The German buyer needs high-volume, defect-free manufacturing. The Chinese supplier has the capacity, the advanced injection molding technology, and the perfect price point. The deal is inked. Lawyers are happy.
But underneath the contract, at the level of the 60-year gear, the warning lights are flashing bright red.
Why?
Because the source text reveals their structural wuxing signs. The German buyer, culturally and structurally in this specific dynamic, represents a pure metal sign. And the Chinese supplier, operating in the booming, adaptive, chaotic manufacturing hub of southern China, represents a pure wood sign.
And the core dynamic here, the fundamental law of physics between these two elements on the wuxing wheel, is metal chops wood.
Let's break down the nature of metal in a corporate context. What is metal? Metal is rigid. It is cold, it is structural, it is incredibly precise.
It holds an edge.
Yes. Metal draws absolute boundaries. It sets the rules. A sword or an axe is made of metal. It creates shape by cutting away what is unnecessary. The German automotive buyer is acting as the ultimate KPI auditor. They operate on strict Six Sigma principles.
And for anyone who hasn't suffered through a corporate management seminar, Six Sigma is a highly disciplined methodology that uses data and statistical analysis to measure and improve a company's operational performance.
It's intense.
Very. The goal is to eliminate defects to a mathematically absurd degree, like 3.4 defects per million opportunities. It is all about rigid standardization.
Exactly. Their entire business model is based on applying rigid frameworks to ensure absolute predictability.
And then you have wood. What is the business equivalent of wood?
Wood is organic. It represents growth, expansion, flexibility. Think of a tree. A tree doesn't grow in a perfectly straight line, according to a schematic, right?
It branches out, it adapts to the sunlight.
Its roots find ways around rocks in the soil. Wood is alive and constantly reaching outward. The Southern Chinese plastic molder operates on this principle.
Their competitive advantage is their agility.
Their ability to rapidly scale, to pivot production lines overnight, to build deep relationship networks that allow them to navigate a highly chaotic, fast-moving environment.
So you put these two entities together.
And the relationship begins to break down almost immediately, not because of the plastic, but because of how the German buyer tries to manage the partnership.
They use audits.
The buyer uses audits as their primary tool of engagement. They send teams of inspectors with clipboards and calipers. They demand to see the documentation for every single step of the process.
To the metal buyer, this is simply how business is done. It is responsible, professional management. They are using their metal nature to build a strong, reliable structure.
But wait, how else are they supposed to do it? If you are building car parts, you need precision. You can't just wing it. So the German buyer is just doing their job. How does the wood supplier experience this?
They don't experience it as helpful management because the physics dictate that metal chops wood. The very act of auditing is received by the supplier as a violent psychological attack.
I want to ground this metaphor because it's so evocative. A guy with a metal axe chopping off branches. But in a business sense, what does that chopping actually look like?
It looks like the wood supplier finding a brilliant, highly efficient shortcut on the factory floor that saves 10 cents per unit.
Which is great.
But because it deviates from the approved binder of protocols, the metal auditor writes them up, penalizes them, and forces them to go back to the slower, documented way.
Ouch.
It looks like demanding the wood supplier freeze all their other rapid growth projects to fill out weeks of compliance paperwork. Every routine check, every demand for another layer of documentation feels like an interrogation.
It feels like their natural organic growth is being violently pruned.
The supplier feels suffocated. They feel like the buyer fundamentally doesn't trust them, despite their proven track record of delivering the goods.
And the tragic irony here is that the German buyer genuinely thought they were being incredibly helpful.
We really did.
They thought, we are giving you our world-class structural frameworks. We are helping you mature your processes. They thought they were building a bridge, but the supplier felt like they were being locked in a cage.
This is the blindness of the KPI auditor perspective in full display. A modern, data-driven spreadsheet would look at this deal 6 months in and say, everything is fine, the plastic molder has the right price, they have the capacity, the defect rate is low.
But the relationship collapsed anyway.
Completely.
And it collapsed crucially, not over price, not over the quality of the plastic, but over this intense, unbearable psychological friction. The wood supplier simply could not withstand the constant rigid hacking of the metal buyer.
They eventually walked away from a highly lucrative contract because the psychic toll of the 180-degree clash was just too high.
Now, a Western executive looks at that and says, the supplier was irrational. They walked away for millions of dollars just because they didn't like paperwork.
But the factory owner, looking at the 60-year gear, would have immediately flagged this pairing as highly destructive before the ink was even dry.
They would have known that metal chops wood is not a business strategy. It's a slow, agonizing execution.
It highlights a profound failure in Western business education. We are taught to manage the numbers, to manage the supply chain, to optimize the logistics.
But we are never taught to manage the psychological geometries of the people actually executing those tasks.
Okay, but if metal naturally chops wood, how do any German automotive companies and Chinese manufacturers ever do business together? Do they just avoid each other? That seems impossible in a globalized economy.
That is the brilliance of understanding Guanxi physics. You don't just throw up your hands and surrender to the clash.
You can fix it.
You engineer the geometry. If the German buyer understood these elemental dynamics, they would have realized they needed an intermediary. Specifically, they needed a water sign.
A water sign. How does that fix the chopping?
Look at the Wuxing cycle of generation. Metal generates water.
Like the condensation on the sword.
Exactly. And water nourishes wood. If they had hired a liaison or a project manager who operated with water energy, someone focused on flow, communication, and smoothing out rough edges, that person could have acted as a buffer.
Oh, I see.
The water liaison takes the rigid, precise demands of the metal buyer, translates them into a fluid, manageable process, and uses that process to nourish the wood supplier's growth, rather than hacking at it with an axe.
That is incredible. You introduce the missing element to create a generative flow instead of a destructive clash. You turn a 180-degree clash into a functional pipeline.
But doing that requires acknowledging that these invisible forces exist in the first place.
You have to admit that the spreadsheet isn't the whole reality.
Precisely. You have to move beyond the dashboard.
Which brings us to the most critical part of this deep dive. We've explored the history. We've seen the mathematical magic of the 120-degree generative triangle.
We've seen the sheer destruction of the 180-degree clash, the tragedy of water fighting fire, and the catastrophic reality of metal chopping wood.
But we are living in the modern world. We aren't Zhou dynasty kings casting yarrow stocks. We have jobs, we have Slack channels, we have contracts to sign. So how do you, the listener, actually use this insider knowledge?
How do you apply this practically?
Exactly. How do you apply this before you sign your next big contract or hire your next key executive?
The goal here is synthesis. We aren't suggesting that you throw away all your KPI data, fire your Six Sigma black belts, and only rely on ancient mysticism.
That would be absurd and, frankly, a quick way to bankrupt your company.
The goal is to use Guanxi physics as the ultimate preliminary audit.
The audit before the audit.
Exactly. Before you check their financials, before you verify their ISO certifications, you need to check their elemental resonance. You need to scan their elemental field and their social calibration using the principles of the 60-year gear.
Right, but how do we do that? We already established that asking for their birth chart in a B2B meeting is a non-starter. So what are the concrete, modern behavioral translations? What are we looking for in a Slack channel or a Zoom meeting to diagnose someone's elemental type?
It means learning to listen to the friction and observing behavioral reflexes under pressure. We are so trained to ignore our intuition in professional settings.
We really are.
We are told that if the math works, our discomfort is totally irrelevant. But Guanxi physics tells us that our discomfort is data. It is highly accurate, structural data.
It's your internal gear grinding against theirs and sending a vibration up your spine?
Yes. So when you are in those initial meetings, pay attention to the cadence of the interaction. You can actually test this by introducing a hypothetical challenge in the negotiation.
Give me an example.
Say, what happens if our primary shipping port shuts down for a week?
Oh, I love this. A stress test.
Exactly. And watch how they react. Do they immediately demand more data, ask a dozen granular questions, and want to map out a 5-stage contingency plan?
That's water behavior.
Right. Do they wave it off, say, we'll figure it out, let's just focus on hitting the launch date?
That's fire behavior.
Do they immediately cite a contract clause or a corporate policy that covers force majeure?
That's metal behavior.
Or do they suggest calling 3 of their local contacts to see if they can route around the problem organically?
That's wood behavior.
That is incredibly actionable. You aren't looking at their zodiac sign, you are looking at their operational reflex.
And more importantly, how does their reaction make you feel? If you are a highly adaptable wood sign and their immediate reaction to a problem is to build a rigid, unforgiving metal framework around you, your gut is going to tighten.
You're going to feel that axe.
And that is the exact moment you have to stop and say, wait, we have a structural incompatibility. If a casual 15-minute coffee chat, the Western equivalent of the tea table, feels heavier, more draining, and more complex than a 5-hour board meeting, the 60-year gear is trying to tell you something.
Trust the geometry of the room.
I love that phrasing, trust the geometry of the room, because if it feels like an uphill battle just to agree on the agenda for the kickoff meeting, what is it going to feel like when millions of dollars are on the line and a container ship actually does get delayed?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, true mastery in business and perhaps in life isn't about forcing people to align with your worldview.
The KPI auditor spends their entire life exhausted.
Constantly tightening the screws, constantly threatening penalties, desperately trying to force mismatched gears to turn. But the factory owner, the master of Guangxi physics, understands that mastery is finding the people you naturally group with.
It's honoring the core principle of Hexagram 8.
Which is union. It is about finding the path of least resistance, the natural pooling of water, the generative triangle.
It's the difference between building a canal by blasting through solid granite with dynamite versus simply finding the natural riverbed and letting the water flow where it already naturally wants to go. You save so much dynamite and so much energy.
Exactly. You scan the field, you identify the elemental signatures through their behavior, and you ask yourself, are we creating a 120-degree flow? Or are we setting up a 180-degree clash?
And if it is a 180-degree clash, because sometimes you just don't have a choice in who you work with.
Right, then you ask, do I have the resources, the intermediary elements, the water buffer to manage that invisible cost? Because the cost will be there. The friction is guaranteed by the physics of the interaction.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening journey. We started with this core concept of Hexagram 8, by the art of grouping. We looked at the profound danger of the forced partnership, the illusion that legal contracts can somehow override human physics.
We explored the astronomical and psychological roots of the 60-year gear, moving away from the plug-and-play modular view of humanity and embracing the reality of interlocking structural gears.
We saw the absolute beauty of the 120-degree rule, the generative triangle of the rat, dragon, and monkey, and how it creates that elusive, magical, silent efficiency where massive deals are done in 5 minutes over tea.
And we confronted the harsh reality of the 180-degree clash, the invisible costs that arise when water tries to partner with fire, realizing that good intentions and clear communication cannot prevent structural friction.
And of course, the unforgettable image of the German auto buyer and the Chinese plastic molder, metal chopping wood. The tragic realization that sometimes the very tools we use to build a partnership, our audits, our KPIs, our relentless pursuit of Six Sigma perfection, are the very weapons that destroy it.
The transition from auditing to attacking, simply because we misread the elemental geometry of our partner.
It is a profound shift in how we view corporate responsibility.
It really is.
I want to remind you, the listener, that Guangxi physics is not just a framework for massive international B2B supply chains in Shenzhen. These concepts, the wuxing energy fields, the generative flows, the destructive clashes, they govern the dynamics of your own office.
Your own team.
They govern your hiring practices, the way you interact on Slack, and even your personal partnerships. The laws of physics don't stop at the edge of the factory floor.
The geometry of trust and friction is everywhere once you know how to look for it.
So we want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Think about the most difficult, the most incredibly frustrating professional relationship you are currently dealing with.
The person who makes you dread opening your inbox.
The project that feels absolutely cursed. You've probably spent months blaming their personality. You've blamed their work ethic, their lack of vision, or their stubbornness. You've probably complained to your spouse about them over dinner.
But step back and look at it through the lens of Hexagram 8.
What if neither of you is actually doing anything wrong? What if you were simply water and fire caught in a 180-degree clash? What if you are desperately, exhaustingly trying to force an alignment that the universe's internal gears strictly forbid? And if that's the case, you don't need another communication workshop to fix it.
You might just need to stop fighting the physics.
You know, we started this deep dive talking about that massive collapsing joint venture deal, the pristine spreadsheets, the flawless logistics, burning to the ground because of invisible force. Next time you look at a perfect spreadsheet, ask yourself, are you looking at a blueprint for success, or are you just looking at the schematics of a ticking time bomb?